Hi, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. So we decided that we aren't going to reschedule this one. We're just going to take it here and run. Thanks for joining us. Super excited to have Katie Olds with us again today for the Steer Then Gear webinar. It looks like we have cameras on, so that's awesome. If you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions throughout. You can also use the chat. But other than that, Katie, I'll hand it off to you to go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Kelsey. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having your cameras on. I really appreciate it. I think it makes such a difference for the overall experience for everyone that's participating. I know we have a small group because of the snafu in the scheduling platform that happened out there. So hopefully the solution will be that we can provide a recording to some people. And, we have a small group, so that just means we get more time to participate and collaborate with each other. And since there is a small group, I may ask some questions along the way where you can nod or chime in by unmuting yourself if you'd like to. But I think this is such a fun and relevant, timely conversation that we're having about, the need to be able to pivot and evaluate when change is needed within an organization. And for some of us, I think we've been experiencing some of that need for change and pivoting even in our personal lives. So certainly some of this content may overlap to that side of your life. So the content of this workshop, I will tell you, was inspired by my time boating this winter out on the Gulf of Mexico. That is Ginger that you're seeing in front of us. She is a Formula 206 LS that I am just ecstatic to be learning the waters with. We had her completely redone last year. So she's an old classic cigarette runner, that type model boat that is now redone and ready for the waters. But as we've been navigating the waters on the Gulf this winter, there's so many times when it occurred to me how different it is to navigate these waters versus maybe some of the waters in Wisconsin that we were used to. And that just kept leading me to the thought of how different it is to navigate some of the things in our business and professional lives today than maybe they were even just a couple of years ago because of how much is changing. So I will draw some analogies as we go along here, and hopefully that will inspire some, thoughts of your own or questions, just looking at things from maybe a slightly different angle. When we talk about pivoting, a lot of times I think we're thinking about a 360-degree change that's needed. And, I see pivoting and changing happening all around us, and it's not necessarily always that drastic. But I think what the last, year plus has brought to our attention is that, things are going to change whether we plan for them or not. So perhaps the best thing we can do is embrace that spirit and start planning for just continuous improvement and changes in the work that we're doing. So nod or show some participation if you're with me when I say we've all had to go through some sort of significant change in the last year, right? And some of it's been a lot of fun and exciting because it's new territory for us, but oftentimes there's a lot of resistance and hesitancy because of the unknown or because of just the removal from our comfort zones too. I've experienced this in the businesses that I own, as well as just watching some of our employees or our clients adapt to some of the changes that we're going through. So today I'm going to be talking a lot about change and recognizing when change is necessary, evaluating the best approaches to it, and then coming out the other end, and how do we, continue to implement these changes while continuously pivoting so that we're not getting stuck in one place. And the direction I'm coming from is a lot of personal experience, some, just my interest in studying organizational management and change management, I started my career early on with little or hardly any education and continue to grow my education in the formal sense through my MBA in the last couple of years, primarily because I'm just so fascinated by the different ways we can look at an item or look at a business and be able to treat it like a Rubik's Cube, if you will, and make the right maneuvers to make it all make a little more sense. So I'm coming to you with both that personal experience, but also that formal education and research side of things, as well as the third tier of that being, just a lot of conversations with startup businesses that I'm supporting or other business owners that are going through some challenges and also finding some opportunities or, the hidden gem, if you will, throughout the changes they're going through. So feel free to chime in with additional questions. But the steer then gear, I'll tell you the title of this came from something that you do often with boating. And that's when you get into kind of a sticky situation with finer maneuvering. It's kind of a common term that we use that implies you need to kind of halt the momentum, plan your turns or your movements before you put things back into gear. And that's something that has been a challenge for me, I'll say, to implement in some of our businesses, but has been really a valuable, I think, a way to approach things because it's forcing me to take a step back and really think about, well, what is the challenge here? What is the pain that needs to be addressed? And really, fine point tackle that issue versus trying to flip everything upside down. So slowing down that momentum when we're, everything's full speed ahead going one direction, when you start to slow that down, you start to see other directions that you're able to turn. And that's, I think, been kind of a mourning period or challenge for a lot of other business owners that I talk with, is that, they're going through this mourning process almost of the loss or the loss in the market that's happened for some businesses. And it's been just heartbreaking, honestly, to see some of that happening to our businesses in the area. But for others, they're fortunate in being able to find a way to navigate through that and either do that complete 360 or maybe find those smaller ways to make some smaller turns in what they were expecting or anticipating to do. Some of the ways that we've seen this recently, if you think about it, I'm just going to reference what the external environment and society has kind of forced upon us to adapt to changing times in the last year. I mean, we've noticed some businesses have to close because of social distancing issues or other concerns. We've seen some businesses maybe adapt a new model of service for the delivery of their goods. Some businesses that never thought about doing curbside are now providing curbside service. Others that used to go and sit inside a restaurant, maybe you're sitting outside next to a heater lamp and dining outside. So there's certainly a lot of changes that maybe they didn't anticipate a year ago, but now they find themselves navigating through. So some of the questions I want us to be thinking about throughout the course of this hour together is, how do we know when that change is needed, and how do we know how extremely we need to react to that? And then how do we evaluate if it's worth making that change for ourselves and for the business? Some of the other unique things I've seen people do is we worked with a realtor that started doing virtual showings for us, basically going in and we'd be on Zoom or FaceTime on the other side of things instead of having to be there in person. This Zoom call that we're on, in fact, this wasn't something we used to do a couple of years ago for workshops with the Entrepreneur Center. So again, where there's some hurdles that we've had to get through, I think it's also opened a lot of doors to be able to be in multiple places at once. As business leaders, our challenge is trying to figure out how do we take all of these new trends and needs and expectations of customers and be able to meet them while still being, sustainable and conscious to what our business goals or plans are. So if you think about the actions that we plan to take as we're going through any change, I always try to think about, how big does my action need to be in order to create the reaction that I'm looking for? So what is that old saying? If a tree falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it, does it really make a sound? The same could be applied to changes that we're making within our businesses. If our change is rather insignificant and doesn't change the trajectory of things or the consumer perception of what we're providing as a value to them, does it really make a change? Does it really lead to a reaction that we're looking for? So some of the questions I ask myself before going through a major change with any of our businesses is how will it affect my customers and my stakeholders? So it's not just the B2C, business to consumer conversation. We're also talking about our stakeholders at large. And what are the stakeholders of a business? They're not just the end consumer, they're also the suppliers that we're working with, the employees that we're employing. All of those people, if you think of it in a sense, are like your customers, but they're your stakeholders. And if the changes we're making are good for one, but not good for the other, there's usually a natural correction that's going to have to happen. So I guess the challenge here is creating an action that has, an equal reaction or one that's positive for all the stakeholders. And if we make that change, does it bring us the desired outcome? A lot of times that change is driven by the need to create new revenue or replace lost revenue. So there are certainly other reasons for change too. Social justice is a very important topic right now that many businesses are facing. And as we look to diversify not only what we're offering out to the public, but what we're offering internally to those stakeholders, there's a whole wide variety of challenges that we could face or reasons for creating a change that may not always just be directly connected to that top dollar. So what outcome are we looking for, I guess, when we start taking these actions? And then, how big of a change are we willing to take? So when I talk about taking action with change, we can write the best business plan and strategic, plan for our changes within our organization. But at what point is it too much? Or it is just as important as thinking about if it's too little, does it really make an impact? So it's finding that happy medium of what can we afford to do, not only financially, but culturally within our organization. What can we afford to do with this change while still making a significant enough impact on our stakeholders and our customers that it matters and it's worth the effort? So change isn't always needed, of course. Sometimes things are already on their trajectory and the momentum is headed the right way and it's smooth sailing ahead and we can enjoy that moment, but only for a moment. I've learned the hard lesson in life that when things get too smooth and I get too comfortable, it's probably because I'm not planning for change and I'm going to feel that 12 months later. So I'd encourage anyone that's getting just really comfortable right now to realize that they're probably paying the price of comfort right now for the discomfort that's going to be happening later. And sometimes it's just frankly easier to face the challenge of changes within an organization when things are going really well and you have that cultural momentum, that positive energy within your stakeholders to be able to make that change without huge disruption. So let's talk about, when change is needed. There's several different warning signs that can be out there. One very common, I think, is that you feel like your company is always playing catch up. Either you're chasing revenue, or you're chasing new products, or you're having a challenge with hiring people. It's always something that seems just slightly out of grasp, and we feel like we're trying to play catch up. And potentially it's keeping you up at night because you're just not where you want to be with something. And no matter how much you throw at it, it seems like you're not quite getting to that next step. I see that as a really common sign that people can easily recognize when change is needed. But it also makes me think of the definition of insanity, right? The definition of insanity is basically doing the same thing multiple times and hoping for a different result. I think we've all been guilty of it at different points where, we start to place the blame on whether it's the employee or the client or the customer or the vendor or whoever it is. We keep saying, I'm doing everything I should be doing. The business is doing what it should be doing. Why aren't we finding this person or selling that product? And in reality, I think we need to just take a step back and say, ding, ding, I remember this is one of those signs that I need to recognize when change is needed within my organization. So looking back internally at that point. I actually had some of these situations happening with my marketing firm that I own, where we had to start looking at, what are we going to be when we grow up? And we've probably done this 3 times now in the course of the last 10 years. And we started as kind of pioneering in this automated SMS messaging world back 10 years ago, before you got all those messages from your doctor's office. And, we're breaking into a new market, and it's exciting. It's full of challenges. And then a few years later, you realize, well, we're now one of 5,000 other companies providing the same service. So in that aspect, we found ourselves in a situation where we just we had to step back and realize, you know what, now we're in the mode of playing catch up. We're no longer pioneering in something, because the competition and the market had shifted. So it's okay to rebirth any brand or product or even your company that you have. It's not a bad thing. Actually, it's usually a good thing to be able to take what you already do well and maybe add a service to it, or come at it from a different angle, providing other supplementary services. It happens. It's painful. I'll tell you, sometimes when I go through major changes with the companies, it's sleepless nights and hoping I'm making the right decisions. But it can also be really rewarding when you look back and you say, you notice other similar companies maybe that had that same decision that they were faced with, and they got too comfortable. And that's why not every business honestly makes it forever, and nor are they meant to. So if we want to be sustainable as business leaders, I think we're always having to recognize when some of these warning signs happen, so that we can adapt before we're forced to adapt. Another big sign is kind of what I was leading into there. There's just too much competition sometimes in a market. Whether you're in a market that was fully saturated already, or maybe you were in an emerging technology market, but now there's all of a sudden more competition. So the benefits that differentiated you from maybe your couple of competitors before have now become a commodity within that industry. You see this oftentimes with many different industries. If you're talking about, the restaurant industry was very saturated a couple of years ago, for instance, and went through a lot of challenges within that industry to just find enough employees. Within hospitality in general, that was happening. So it isn't always just an internal weakness of your company. Sometimes it is a driven need because of what's happening industry-wide with the amount of competition. Another sign I notice a lot with companies that I've worked with is that they're facing limited growth. And sometimes they recognize that as a sign that change is needed. And other times, you get stuck in the spot where you wonder if it's other factors. Maybe, we didn't pick up new revenue this year or this quarter because of something else externally happening. And sometimes that's true. But a lot of times that limited growth should be a warning sign that something else is going to be needed in the future in order to refill your sales funnel, whatever type of business you have. Or it's an opportunity to not only refill the funnel of the current products you have, but potentially look at diversifying what you're offering in the market. It's sometimes what I've noticed is another sign is that, you have all of a sudden you look at your books and you're realizing that a certain line of your products is performing really well right now. And so you're happy about that, and hopefully you're cheering about that with your team of employees. But at the same time, it disguises the fact that maybe some of your other products or services aren't performing as strongly anymore. And sometimes that's simply because we've shifted our focus and we've kind of heavied up our focus too much in one direction and forgot about the rest of our products and services with our marketing and our efforts. However, sometimes it's just because they've become irrelevant and it's not what the customer is looking for anymore. So your need for change isn't always because you have to change the entire company. Sometimes that need for change is simply looking at what is working well and what can be let go of. Tell you, when the pandemic hit last year and we were going through all these closures and shocks to the system, it was a scary time to be an entrepreneur and a business owner. It was also a time that I think hopefully some of us in the future can look back and say we're really proud of the resilience of our employees and the way we were able to adapt and hold on to things worth holding on to and put others into a rest mode. Talking about that steer then gear again, letting go of some of the momentum in the areas that you can only worry about the things you can control, right? So back when the pandemic hit and we were going through all these closures, one of the businesses that I own is in the food service industry. And we frankly shut down 2 of the 3 entire divisions. And we're just now revamping them, revamping one of the 2 actually that we shut down, and the other will be some time yet to come. Thankfully, we were able to take that momentum, so we paused it on more of that catering side because frankly, big events and catering weren't happening in the last year. When we shifted that focus to supporting more of our manufacturing corporate B&I cafes, where we have staff on site using kitchens at manufacturing plants, for instance, preparing food to keep employees energized and working in those environments during this time that they were challenged too. So we were able to become kind of this employee morale booster for some of the partners that we worked with and divert some of our attention, our focus, and our resources to those aspects of the business while we put a complete pause on the other divisions. And that was a really scary thing to do, I'll be honest, but it turns out that it allowed us to be good at a couple of things and not just be okay at everything else that we were struggling with. So it's certainly okay, I'm finding out, to just put a big pause on some things if the market is not ready for them. Kind of a cool opportunity that some of our employees had, in fact, during this time was, they've been just stellar, I have to say. To have a crew of people that have been willing to adapt and be innovative and create ways to keep themselves and our customers safe during this time that there was no book written about 5 years ago. So we're living and learning as we go through this process. But they were able to do that and able to create such a sense of safety and comfort and boosting employee morale for the clients that we still served as corporations, that they had this incredible opportunity back last spring to actually cater to the White House crew that came in when Vice President Pence visited Madison. And whichever side of the aisle you're on, it doesn't matter. Guess what? That's a really cool experience for my employees to know that they had stepped up their game, made the changes, adapted to what the customer needs were, made everyone feel comfortable to the point that they were able to provide a high security service like that. So I'm really proud of what my employees have been able to do. And I think part of what was needed to be able to experience this is all these things we're talking about right now aren't just one person. It's really looking at your entire team of people and bringing them along with you, looking for and asking for what changes can be, what need for changes can be identified. 10 people can come up with, 10 times the ideas that one person can when we're faced with a new challenge. So I digress a little bit there, but another really common sign for needing change is when there's limited response from the market. So what that means is that it may be that your message that you're trying to get across is just kind of deafened by everything else that's happening out there. So while your marketing used to be working and it was driving in a certain number of leads, maybe if you're in more of a B2B or a higher price product that you're selling, you're talking about your customer acquisition cost and your lead generation in that case. And when you start to see that start to trickle down, even though you're blasting out the same messages, sometimes it isn't that you need to change the entire business or even create a new product or service. It's that we need to be saying something different or saying it in a different way that becomes noticeable again. And then the last sign for change I'm going to bring up is one that I think as business owners, we don't always want to fess up to, but it is just our perception has changed. So maybe the business or your own life goals are no longer connecting. And when that happens, it can be pretty obvious on how the business is performing. So at that point, the leaders within a business either need to adapt what their goals are, their expectations, and their commitments are, or vice versa. They need to move that need for change onto the organization to better meet what they want to do with it. You see that more common, I would say, in very micro businesses. Here's a great example actually related to boating. We have that picture of Ginger I shared with you earlier. She has no cover on her right now, and the sun is just beating down on her. And before I head back up to Wisconsin next week, we have got to get a cover on this thing. So we are working with this really micro business. It's a mom and pop shop. It's a man and his wife that have been running this custom canvas company for the last 30 years, they tell us, and they're getting out of the business. We're going to be one of the last projects they do on Saturday. And her story that she shared just in great detail with us as she was pouring out her life story one day was that, the business has been really good. It's provided them with stability, with creativity, some flexibility, but financial freedom. All these great things that as entrepreneurs you might be seeking. But the other thing that it did was, she said, it made her feel like in the end a prisoner of her own business. And it got to the point that she was so burned out, she's willing to give up all of that they worked to build to bring back a sense of value and freedom in her own life. So I hope she does actually consider selling the business. I think there's a lot of value to it versus just closing it. But I'm telling you that your own perception of where your life is headed and where your business is headed, if you're a really micro business, it's gonna matter. And sometimes it's just that emotional intelligence to kind of keep things in check and make sure those two are colliding or at least headed the same direction. Okay, so aside from looking at some of the signs of change needed, let's talk about some of the real signs of just a failing company. Let's be honest. I mean, there's just no other nice way to put it, I think. Whoops. So if there's a lack of enthusiasm that's happening, it's usually leading to poor quality of products and services. You're usually getting ineffectiveness within your organization, and that affects, your bottom line as well as your top line out there as far as what you're providing out to your clients. These are red hot warning signs that we're talking about now. We were previously talking about, okay, here's some signs that we sometimes recognize, sometimes don't, but it's just a sign that something needs to be changing, whether it's a product, a service, a marketing angle. There's many different elements that can have a small pivot to make a big difference. But now we're really talking about what are some of the red hot warning signs. If I see this happening, it's time to put the majority of my attention on this and make sure it's addressed. It's not something I can address slowly over the course of time, but it needs my attention. It needs it right now. So when you realize that you have one of these signs, you may be sitting in a failing business. It may not have failed yet, but it has every momentum going to the point that it could be headed that direction. So you also have, if your team is lacking focus towards the customers, if all of a sudden you notice your team is more worried about me, and my time off, and what am I going to do? What do I get out of this? What about me? Oh, they didn't do something right. I did this right. I mean, we've heard kind of these mantras in different corporate cultures as well as small businesses, where all of a sudden the importance is no longer directed on what are we providing to the customer, but it's provided on why isn't life fair for me? And it's a really dangerous spot to be in as a team. One thing I will share with you that I've done that has made a nice difference is I've brought in external speakers or connected people with mentors where they can start looking at, or talking about ways that a team can be more customer focused and work on internal and external communication in ways different than it would be perceived if I was saying it. Is ever have a situation where maybe your manager, or back when we were children, our parent maybe would say something to us, or maybe it's your spouse even right now that has said something to you probably 5 times, and it goes in one ear and it goes out one ear, and then you hear it from someone else and you're like, wow, that's a fantastic idea. Well, that's kind of where I went with this. Was I recognized this happening, in fact, at one point where we had a team that was just becoming too focused on ourselves and not as focused on communication outward or with others internally. And we had to put a real hard pause to things and kind of reset. And that's okay. A reset is needed. Aside from some employees not being coachable, you also have some management that is not coachable. I think if we were all really honest with ourselves, we'd say we're probably resistant to coaching at some point in our lives. And hopefully that didn't last very long. But it's funny how little I realize I know now versus what I thought I knew then. And I think that happens to a lot of people within businesses, including management and leadership, and probably the most dangerous. So when we talk about, your team losing focus potentially, but when you have a management team or a leadership team that is no longer focused on being coached or coaching others, you have a real big issue that's going to be rearing its ugly head in the future. And put those two together and you have a company, of course, that can lack focus and is constantly just being reactive versus proactive. So if you've ever heard the saying that we're only as strong as the weakest member in our chain or our link or our team, it's true. If you have 5 really stellar people and one that, is causing a lot of the challenges, it's not just going to be challenges for that person, it's going to be challenges for all the other people amongst the team too, it might be easy to write someone off and say, that person just doesn't get it, or they just don't have the skills to do this. But when in reality, sometimes a better solution might be asking ourselves, how do we bring this person along? If they don't have a certain skill, or potentially they don't have a certain emotional intelligence skill, or there's a language barrier, or whatever the issue might be that makes them feel or look like the weakest link in the team, how do we help that person overcome that hurdle and not be that weakest link? Then the inability to execute is a biggie. I'll be real honest that I've been guilty of it, and I catch myself being guilty of it. We have these great ideas and we don't implement them, or we're slow to hire or quick to hire and slow to fire sometimes because we get emotional about it. Maybe we don't want to let someone go. Maybe we don't want to mourn the loss of a product or a service that we had. So we're really slow to make that pivot or that change. But an inability to execute can be one of the most dangerous attributes of a business leader. So our job as business leaders is to make the tough decisions and to make the tough actions when really, I mean, that's who should be doing it. I don't expect employees to be having to carry that burden. I'm willing to make the tough decision, have that tough conversation, and be willing to execute on a plan. But I'll be honest, we're all human, and there's certainly been times that I've been slow to react to it. But it is one of those signs, if you catch yourself in that position where you know you have options, in fact, even worse, you know you have plans that could be executed, but you're not executing them because of your own personal barriers, that can certainly lead to a failing business. And then lastly, a sign here that you could be looking at a failing company is when the team lacks confidence in management, which can be led to very easily by the one we just talked about. If you're too slow to react, or you're unwilling to make a decision, or you're unable to execute on a plan, it's very tough to follow the vision of a leader that you don't have that confidence in. So now we've talked quite at length about how do we identify some of the need for change, some of the signs, for even worse yet, the signs of a failing business potentially. And we've talked about the fact that it's just always going to be a need, that there's going to be changes happening. It's just a matter of identifying them and evaluating them. How do we do that? How do we actually make the change? So some tips I'll share with you for making that pivot. Number one, I would say don't wait. It's going to get worse. It's going to get harder to make the change the longer you stay in one spot. Even though it's scary sometimes to make a change, I'm telling you, it's going to be easier to change it today than it's going to be to change it in 2 years. The same applies, I think, to the mourning phase that some people go through. There's like a grief process we go through, I think, as business owners, where, as we look at change, we sometimes get distracted from the opportunities when we think about what are we losing, what caused this need for the change. But another tip would be to identify new goals. So are you all familiar with SMART goals? I have a couple screens on, so no, thank you for chiming in there, Roxanne. So SMART goals, I will tell you, this is something I've done with employees in a couple of my companies now for a while, and I still do personally, but I also do it when I'm looking at adapting, making any significant change to a business plan. And so the acronym for SMART goals is going to be your specific, your measurable, it's attainable, it's relevant, and it's time-based. So saying to yourself, I want to grow my business, is not a SMART goal. How you make it a SMART goal is by making it very specific. How much do you want to grow that business? Would be measurable, correct? And is it attainable? I mean, don't say you're going to grow it 2,000% in the next 30 days, right? Make it attainable. I mean, this is the same thing you would do with a personal goal of yours, maybe. I hear so many people going into this new year talking about weight loss, for instance. They put on the COVID-15 and they're saying, I want to lose 100 pounds in the next 30 days, when in reality, more of a SMART goal would be, I'm going to, break it down into attainable and measurable goals. So with your business, making sure those goals are really relevant to what's happening, not only internally, but externally in society, is going to be important. And then the time-based, any goal I make now, I caught myself just doing this habitually because it becomes like muscle memory as you're writing goals, but it should have a time or a deadline on it. So I don't even write New Year's resolutions anymore. For the last probably 5 years, I would say I write New Year deadlines for myself. So by X date, I'm going to attain or create or do this specific item. And I find that keeps us accountable as business leaders too. But it also makes our business plan more accurate because we're saying, if I'm going to do this by then, what resources would I need to get to that point? Does that help, Roxanne? Perfect. So another tip I'll have is don't uproot everything. I shared with you kind of a personal experience there where we had to shut down 2 of 3 divisions of a business, and yeah, that was tough. But you need to always uproot everything to see significant change. I mean, that might be an extreme situation that, I mean, unfortunately, many of us faced those types of decisions in the last year. But you don't always have to uproot everything. Usually when you look at a business, even one that needs significant change, there are going to be portions of it that are still very salvageable. I talked about that custom canvas company, for instance. Maybe even if they don't want to continue doing the business the way they're doing it, maybe there's a small part of it they can still salvage of value to relieve some of that pressure or that need for change. And then I will suggest listening to customers and not just the words they're saying, but where they're coming from. So of course, if you ask a customer of almost any business, what can we do different for you? It's going to be, I want things cheaper or I want things faster. All right. But let's listen to what they actually need to improve the value of what they're getting from us. And then lastly, I'll share the tip of making sure your new model allows for future change too. So when we're writing any sort of change or business growth plan, we're not necessarily writing it because we're going into an exit stage for the business next. Sometimes you are. Sometimes you're making a final pivot because you want to make it marketable for an exit from the business, and that's okay. That's part of business. In most cases, though, I think that change should be written and executed in a way that it still leaves more doors open for you in the future. So our goal when we're making these goals and making these changes is to open more doors for our company rather than narrowing it down to only 1 or 2 options that we could choose in the future. So think of it as, yes, you want to kind of niche out your product or your service, you're differentiating yourself, you're constantly having to kind of find that pocket for your business and fight for market share, if you will. But that's when we're looking at our product, our service, where we fit in the market. When you're looking at, strategic growth and change, we're also looking at how many doors can I open to have potentially new products, services, or ways to provide additional value in the future. So let's talk about the science of it a bit after that, or the math of it. So we're talking about cost benefit analysis here. So first off, when you're looking at anything like we're talking about, a pivot or a change, a threat that's happening in the market where we need to just start adapting to it, and let's identify first what is the risk that's out there. And this is something, a quick snapshot you can even keep with you if you know you have some decisions to make coming up. But identify the risk, and it could be, not finding enough customers. It could be that your sales slowed down. It could be that you're having HR hiring issues. Maybe it's a risk if you decide to start a different product. Maybe you can't get the supplies in time to do that. There's so many different risks that can be out there. And if you're not differentiating yourself during this process, another risk could be that you're becoming a commodity within your industry, or your product or service is becoming a commodity, which tends to lose value instead of gain value for our customer. Or frankly, the money just isn't there sometimes. So the step 1, I would say, when you're going through this process of thinking about your cost benefit analysis, I'm going to break it down to just kind of a simple process you can go through without getting, too mathematic about this, but in the end, being able to have some numbers attached to this. So step one, I would say, start brainstorming some of your costs and your benefits and put actual dollar values on them. Okay. It's going to be easier to come up with your hard cost for things, of course, versus maybe the cost of a benefit that you get from it. A hard cost could be the price of this pen. Okay. The cost of a benefit, what's my benefit of being able to write? How do you put a price tag on that? And we had a situation recently where we put this brand new lift in thinking it's going to work out really well for Ginger to slide right in there. And then we realized because of the canal, we've got to pull her in backwards. And then challenge upon challenge happened because we didn't look at all of the factors aside from how deep a lift needs to be for a boat to fit onto it. Well, we started to just recently, we had it done the other day, we had this whole new, I don't even know the word for it, but this whole new contraption put onto the engine so that we're able to flush the salt water out of it without doing gymnastics moves to climb around off the back of the boat from the lift in order to get a hose attached to it. So how do I assign the benefit to that? And I'm using this as, I guess, an example because there is no price tag I could put on what is the value of being able to not do gymnastics moves. That's a tough price tag to put on something. But we had to, in a way. If we're going to go out and spend money on a cost of something, how do you figure out if it's worth it? And for some people, it's not a benefit of, effort, physical effort. Sometimes you're talking about the benefit of time. What is your time worth to you? Maybe that's a better price tag that you can put on things. One of the, benefit cost challenges I hear from startup companies a lot is, they don't want to spend the money on an accountant, let's say. They want to do their own books. I'm telling you, I've done that. It's not worth it for me. I will gladly have the assistance from someone who specializes in something and then learn from them to be even better at it. But how do you put the price tag on, was it worth it? Until you start to think about what is my time worth and multiply that dollar out. So sometimes it's as simple as that. So start brainstorming, what are the costs related to a change to a product? So we talked about changing a piece of equipment right now, or the cost of resources needed to change a service that we're offering. Maybe it's the hiring of an additional employee in order to be able to do that. And some of them are, of course, going to be easier than others to estimate. One of the toughest to estimate is the benefit of revenue that could come in. So it's going to be easier to identify the cost of putting a contraption on a boat motor than it is going to be to figure out how much revenue exactly you're going to generate by making a change to your business. And in a nutshell, what you're doing is you're comparing what is the cost, hard cost, variable costs, mental, physical, time cost, compared to what is the benefit I'm going to reap from this, either financially or for ease and comfort or culturally within my organization. There is a mathematic equation you can use for that. I'm going to walk you through just a quick process of it. So if you have a project in mind, maybe it's a new product for your company, maybe it's painting your house, whatever it is, there's an equation that will apply to just about any project that you take on. And I am certainly not a mathematician, so I love simplicity with this. I like to keep things as simple as possible, to keep high level with a lot of the decisions that have to happen fast within a business. So let's say, for instance, your project is going to cost $1,200 to do, okay? So from that project, maybe it's new marketing, maybe it's a new product, whatever it is, you're investing $1,200. Let's keep it small and simple. From that, I derive that I can reasonably expect to make $50 per month from a customer because of that. Okay. Well, how much is that per year? If I'm making 50 bucks a month from a customer, we're talking about $600 a year from that customer. Okay. So how do I know if it's worth it? Well, it depends on how long I'm willing to wait for it to be worth it. So a customer acquisition cost payback period is basically taking how much the project cost and then dividing that out by how much money you made from the customer. Okay. And then you realize that it's going to take you 2 years in this case. I spent $1,200. I'm making $50 a month, $600 a year. It takes me 2 years to receive payback on that. Now that's if I had no margin issues. Okay. So it becomes a little more complicated when you start talking about margins, but when you're talking just hard cost, I'm going to go and I'm going to buy this piece of equipment. Because of it, I'm going to make this much money or I'm going to save this much money per month is how I would look at it. Sometimes it's not because you're generating new revenue. Sometimes it's simply you realize your business isn't being efficient right now. Maybe automating a piece of equipment will make you more efficient. Well, there's a lot more complex ways we can look at this, but for the simplicity of the time we have together, I would say always be considering what is your payback period. So if I'm going to go out and spend $50,000 to invest in a new piece of equipment today, how many customers or how much time is it going to take me to make that a worthwhile investment? And am I willing to wait that long? And if not, then are there ways to speed up the process or to bring down the cost? So Airbnb is an example I'll share with you that had to make some quick pivots, and they'll continue to. And if anyone's tough on time, let me know. I know we started this a few minutes late, so I'm going to go over just by a few minutes. If you need to hop off, I understand, but still trying to give enough quality time here for the topics that we're covering since we got that late start. So Airbnb, great example of a company that's had to pivot many times. My husband and I started a business a few years ago that now leans on Airbnb, honestly, for about 70% of our revenue. So I hope Airbnb is making the right decisions as they pivot. We started this vacation rental business where we buy properties and turn them into short-term rentals instead of long-term rentals, which I'm telling you, lenders do not love the idea on their books and underwriting, but it is doable. So we have figured out a way to make a profitable business out of helping families have, a slice of paradise and make some memories. So Airbnb started though as just two guys that started renting out air mattresses to people because there was a convention in town and there weren't enough hotel rooms, and somehow turned that into now a $74 billion company. But during all of that time, there was a lot of change that happened. And some of the most significant and relevant and recent change that they went through was caused within the last year and a half. They IPO'd the business. They had to come up with cash quickly in some cases. And so they did some really creative things when they were IPOing. But they also had an issue like we had with that business where our world shut down for 2 months with our vacation rentals. And then we found ourselves having a completely different demographic of a customer this year than we've ever had before, because our regular travelers weren't traveling and non-travelers all of a sudden were traveling this year. So you had to adapt quickly, and not just by hacking off your prices to try to save what you could in the market, but really find the opportunity of how do we pivot a little bit to make more sense and be more relevant to the current customer. So Airbnb did a great job by navigating that muddy territory of the cancellation clauses and everything else. But then they launched this product within the last recent months and really accelerated it, where they're providing even people that weren't hosts on Airbnb with the opportunity to sell experiences. And come to find out, that was making not only their top line, but their bottom line better as a company and for the people that the partners they were working with. So great example, I think, of a company that has been pivoting in just listening to what people want today, not what they wanted 2 years ago. However, here's a failed experiment. So keeping in mind, when we talked about action reaction, does the tree make noise if it falls and no one's around to hear it? Well, we also talked about social and emotional intelligence throughout this last hour. And Pepsi had an example I'll share with you here back in 2017, where honestly, I don't think they were really considering the true cost of that cost benefit analysis, and nor were they recognizing some of the signs within their company that needed internal change before they came out with this failed social competence experiment, I'll call it. But so Kendall Jenner, the Kendall Jenner Pepsi commercial that came out a few years ago was basically making light of police brutality issues. And remember, this was in 2017, as this is becoming an even more important topic that companies and individuals are addressing today. Pepsi ended up pulling this ad within 2 weeks, and it was probably 2 weeks too late because Pepsi, which from a marketing aspect, we always reference Pepsi as the company that their value is their brand. They have an inflated value attached to them well beyond the actual dollars of their business because of their brand. And they ended up having the worst consumer perception during that time than they had in 10 years. So 2 weeks undid the work of 10 years of branding. So I share this example with you because as much as I'm encouraging change, I really am. This whole hour I've been talking about why we need change, how to recognize when we need change, how to evaluate the right kind of change. I'm also going to throw the caveat in there that change is good when it creates a positive reaction. What we need to avoid is change that's knee-jerk reaction, where we don't think about the consequences of how it affects our entire stakeholders. And that's not just our customers. Remember, our stakeholders is all those people that are affected by our company. So I will leave you with this as you're considering change within your organizations or even within your families or your personal life. Don't do it alone. There is so much value of having more brains working on something, more energy working behind something than just one person. Within a business, some of the places you'll look to for support, but also need to support those people to bring them along with you on this course of change are your family and friends for your moral support. They might also have connections for you, but it's your accountants and your lawyers. How are they going to possibly advise you correctly a year from now if you haven't brought them along so they understand what you're doing now? Your business, your product, your service, the disclaimer language you're using might have completely different needs or risks tomorrow than it did yesterday. So the importance of bringing these people along and really learning from them too. That's their specialty. I would be naive to think that I had all the answers. I lean on our accountants, our bookkeepers, our lawyers, other professionals that I've built kind of this advisory council with, because 10 brains are better than one. A last fleeting thought on that would be that probably one of the best things I ever did when starting any of the businesses is I've built formal or informal advisory councils. And I'd encourage you to do that if you haven't yet, either for starting a business or even within a business, creating kind of that mastermind group of people that come together and speak objectively about a topic and share their experts in their subject, right? They're subject matter experts that you're putting onto this advisory council. Let them share with you the insight that maybe we don't have yet. So with that, I know we are at time, but I am happy to stay on here and answer some questions, or I'd love to hear if you're going through a change. Anyone going through a change right now they want to talk about? Or any insight or questions are welcome as well. Okay, I'll turn it back over to you then, Kelsey.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Katie, for taking time today and joining us and really kind of showing us how the daunting big changes that we currently go through and have gone through can really, it's okay. And that sometimes we have to take that extra step back to relook at it and pivot if need be. So thank you for giving us this new perspective. I think it will definitely help in personal lives as well as in the business world as well. So with that, thanks again for joining us, everybody. A recording of this will be sent out, and then we'll also be sending out a record or a copy of the slides as well, if you would like to view those. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to the Center for Entrepreneurship, and we can connect you with Katie. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
You as well. Thank you.